It's time, Fort Wayne. Your sports, your station. It's the Sports Rush with Brett Rump.
Max Landis.
Covering all the topics that hit a nerve here in the Summit City.
Clark goes 11 yards, touchdown.
Only on 1380 The Fan and 100.9 FM. Now here's your host, Brett Rump.
The greatest, most interesting, most important person of all time.
You are incredible.
Older than one.
Yeah, well, you're half right.
What is this, amateur hour?
This is going to be huge.
I believe this is going to be our finest hour.
Just when I think you've said the stupidest thing ever, you keep talking.
I think that's the worst thing I've ever heard.
That boy ain't right.
The simplest way to put it,
I have problems.
Welcome to the alleged show.
Y'all ready for this?
Thank God it's...
Here we go. Hey, let's get into a sports weekend. We're ready and fired up, taking you into the weekend of the conference championships in the NFL. So much happening this weekend. College basketball, NBA, NFL, of course. The only thing that's missing from the sports calendar this weekend, college football. Yeah, it's over. Ohio State, your national champions. But it is the Sports Rush, your daily local sports fix, Sports is 6. I am Brett Rump, along with Adam Lundy. We're glad to have you on a Friday, just cruising in to a cold weekend. What happened? It started to tease us once again. I thought we were getting maybe a little bit of, a little more regular weather for the winter. And then all of a sudden this morning, wake up and it is frigid out once again. It seems like we can't break into anything that actually is warm enough to truly melt this snow cover. And by the way, I learned this a while ago. Many years ago, I learned about the fact that when you get snow cover, because of it being white instead of dark on the ground, it actually reduces your air temperature because the air temperature doesn't warm as much with a white snow cover on the ground. So you're stuck with colder weather as long as you've still got that snow cover. It affects the overall temperatures. And so we got to get that out of here, man. We got to, at some point, we've got to warm up and actually get some weather that we can get the snow to melt. That would be kind of nice if we could get that snow to go away. But looking at the forecast as far as when could that happen, there's a chance tomorrow it might make it above freezing. There's a chance it should be above freezing on Monday and Tuesday. So hopefully we get rid of some of this snow. And then, you know what, next week doesn't look too bad. Looks like it's going to stay in the mid-30s all the way up to potentially the mid-40s by next weekend. So we've gotten through the worst of it, let's hope, because it has been frigid this week. Good show on the way. Of course, you're always invited to join us and be a part of the show. You can text the show on the Parkview Sports Medicine text line at 260-447-8500. 260-447-8500 is the Parkview Sports Medicine text line. And should be a fun couple of hours. Of course, coming up on the show, we'll talk about big weekend in sports, plus a big week coming up next week, and a big event coming to Fort Wayne. Not often do you get a chance at a national televised event happening right here in Fort Wayne. Let's be honest. It happens all the time down in Indianapolis or Chicago or Detroit, where you have the NFL, the NBA, but not a lot of times do you get national TV to showcase your city, your team, and that's going to be happening next week. And we'll talk more about that coming up here on today's show. But glad to have you on board for this Friday edition of the Sports Rush. And yesterday, the Pacers began their 2-game swing in Paris, France. Or did they? What an embarrassment against the San Antonio Spurs. Now, the Spurs are not a great team. I know they've got Victor Wembanyama, and he's great, and they've got some young talent. But let's be honest. The Pacers, they consider themselves an upper echelon team in the NBA. You can't be screwing around and losing games to the San Antonio Spurs. And if you lose them the way you lost yesterday, you are absolutely embarrassing yourself And it will be very interesting to see how the Pacers respond to the 140-110 drubbing they took at the hands of the San Antonio Spurs in Paris yesterday. Embarrassing. Now, you look at this game and it's like the stats don't lie. The stats do tell the story. And when you look at the stats of yesterday's game, the one that jumps out immediately is rebounding. The Pacers were out-rebounded in this game 57-31. Out-rebounded by 26 rebounds. And that can't happen. That can't happen. I mean, and it's not like, it's awfully hard to contain a guy that's, 7'4" and can go up and grab it above crowds like Wembanyama. Wembanyama only had 11. The problem is the entire team was rebounding for the Pacers. And the Pacers had an entire team that didn't rebound against the Spurs. You know the problem with the Pacers? Let me just kind of lay it out there. It's a soft team. It does not have a lot of toughness. And when you talk about basketball teams, and any sports team really, a lot of times what you think is the team is going to take on an identity or a personality closely associated with either the coach, maybe a star player or leader in their locker room or clubhouse. And the Pacers have done exactly that. They have basically become a group of Miles Turner. Now, I don't know what toughness Tyrese Halliburton has, but when you see these guys with, their designer glasses, their fancy threads they're wearing to games and stuff, and that, that's around the NBA as a whole, but you just kind of feel like, hey, this is a group that, really enjoys being in the spotlight, but they don't have that kind of toughness where you're going to grind, you're going to do the blue-collar work. It's like a lot of real nice, high-end, white-collar guys that just want to do white-collar things, and they don't want to get their hands dirty. That's the way you feel about the personality of this Indiana Pacers squad. And right now, they are a team full of really the personality of Miles Turner, who's been the longest running Pacer. And, I've never been super high on Miles Turner. I think he's got a nice skill set that fits in the NBA, but I don't know that he's also a guy that's going to win you a championship. A guy that's about 7 feet tall that wants to spend his time out at the three-point arc and is better shooting threes than he is doing anything down around the basket. And at one point they talk about, the defense, it's so important to the Pacers, the rim protection. Well, the only reason rim protection becomes important is because you got a bunch of guys on the floor that can't stop any dribble penetration, and you have to rely on a rim protector to be your last line of defense. And you'd like to see maybe the Pacers at some point stop a guy from driving to the basket or making things a little more challenging on the defensive end. It was just embarrassing. And the Pacers have been better defensively over the last month, but none of it showed up in Paris. They gave up 80 second-half points to the San Antonio Spurs. 80 points in the second half. 140-110, Pacers get beat. And when you're getting beat on the glass, 57-31, you're missing something. That's called effort. That's one of those stats that just shows up in pure effort. It takes the grind, it takes the work, it takes your hands getting dirty, so to speak, to get inside and battle guys and win those battles for rebounds. You've got to have interior toughness. That's the bottom line. You can't, in basketball, you can't constantly be losing the toughness battle around the basket. Pacers paid the price. Got smoked by the Spurs. And I know we talked about it when the schedule was out a couple of weeks ago. We talked about it that the Pacers having to go to Paris with San Antonio having Victor Wembanyama, who's from that country, that it was going to be a very pro-Wembanyama crowd, that he would get a lot of support. He would probably be pretty pumped up to play well in his homecoming of sorts. And he did. 13 of 21 from the field. He hit 4 3-pointers, had a double-double with 11 rebounds to go with his 30 points. He had 6 assists. I mean, he had a solid all-around game. But if you look at the Spurs, who didn't have a pretty good game yesterday? 25 points from Vassell out of Florida State. Just 24 years old, another one of the Spurs youngsters. You got Harrison Barnes chipping in with 20, one of the veterans they've got in San Antonio. Chris Paul, of course. And what they've done, they've brought in 3-4 young players, and they put them with 2 or 3 chiseled veterans. And they were ready to play. They were excited about it. They came, and the Pacers, I don't think, approached this as a true business trip. That's part of the problem, too. They approached this game that it was a free vacation on the company. And they were going to enjoy the sightseeing, and they were going to go get TikTok videos, if that's still a thing. I think it's still a thing. I'm not a big guy on TikTok. But they went around and they enjoyed their sightseeing at the Eiffel Tower. Many of them had never been there. Obi Toppin took advantage of the trip to Paris, and he got engaged. How romantic. But you know what? It takes away from the fact that this is still business. This is 2 of your 82-game schedule, and you got to go win games if you're going to make it and stay in that top 6 position in the Eastern Conference. And that's really the key. You've got to stay in the top 6. And it doesn't matter really, 4th, 5th, 6th. I don't think they're going to get above 4th. I don't think they should be out of the playoffs, but you don't want to have to play play-in games and have all that at stake. But this team has become almost a example of what Miles Turner represents. The finesse player, the big who likes to be outside the arc. Every big man probably dreams when they're growing up playing basketball of being a three-point shooter. Every big wants to be a guard. Every guard thinks they can go down and post up. That's kind of the way it's always been in basketball. But Miles Turner has to show more toughness. Oh, and then once in a while he'll talk a tough game. Once in a while he'll even show up and play like a big. So we know it's possible. Yesterday was not one of those days for Miles Turner. 5 of 17 from the field, took 9 3-pointers, and made only 2. 26 minutes on the floor, finished with a grand total of 3 rebounds. 14 points, 3 rebounds for Turner. I mean, come on. Siakam, Nembhard, Mathurin, Toppin, Nesmith, Thomas Bryant. I mean, all of those guys had 3 rebounds or more. 3 rebounds. He's the guy that's got to do it. I mean, the Pacers have stuck with him as a big, and the problem they got is they really don't have a guy who they can count on to be a rebounder. And you've got to balance it. I mean, you can be a big that steps out and shoots threes like a Nikola Jokic. And by the way, speaking of Jokic, did you see what he did? The 3/4 court, one-handed throw to the basket. I mean, it basically was like a quarterback pass. I mean, he dropped back 3/4 of the way down the floor and threw it. And that thing had a nice arch and just swished through the basket from some 70 feet away. It was unbelievable yesterday. But Miles Turner has to have some kind of a toughness about him and has to be a little more consistent rebounding. And we've talked about the fact that it's in him. 9 times he's had 10 or more rebounds. But 19 times he's had 6 or less. Pacers have to have rebounding from him. I mean, Siakam's another guy that, I mean, it's not like he dominates on the glass, and Siakam is not exactly a big, bulking body. You got to count on him for rebounding if you're the Pacers. But Siakam only 4 rebounds, 18 points. Mathurin was the leader as far as scoring, 11 of 14, 2 for 5 from 3, 24 points for Benedict Mathurin. But this team just has to have a little more of a toughness about them. And you know what? It was interesting last year in the playoffs. We kind of saw what this team can bring if it brings a certain toughness about them. And they get a focus on the toughness plays and the effort plays. They can be a pretty darn good team. And they made a run all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals by being that team. But the one that showed up yesterday, just almost inexcusable to get beat by 30 points by a Spurs team that's under 500. Yeah, they're better than they were a year ago. And yes, they've got a future superstar in the league in Wembanyama. I think he's only going to develop and become better. But, he's still, 19, 20 years old, still just a kid. But you don't get beat by 30. You don't give up 140 points. You don't get out-rebounded 57-31. And I think what we'll be telling is how the Pacers respond, because I expect we're going to see a totally different Pacers team that will show up tomorrow when they have a rematch with the Spurs, again, still in Paris. And it will show you just how bad they were yesterday when they come back and win the game tomorrow. Because that's what'll happen. That's what happens in the NBA. Guys take days off, whether they're dressed or not dressed. Sometimes they take days off. The Pacers, I think, took yesterday off, and now they're 24-20. They're 4 games over 500. And you look at the standings right now in the Eastern Conference. The Pacers are sitting in 5th. They are a game ahead of Detroit, who is in 6th. Yeah, the Pistons are actually the 6th best team in the East. And the Pacers are 2 games ahead of Orlando and Atlanta, who are sitting in 7 and 8. So they're not that far from slipping in those play-in games. Now, how high can they go? You've got the Knicks, who are 4.5 games above the Pacers right now. I don't think they chase down the Knicks because the Knicks have just got a loaded roster. Milwaukee, still, I think, a stronger roster than the Pacers, but they haven't exactly been the most consistent, and it's starting to age a little bit in Milwaukee. But they had a huge rout of Miami, and what a mess in Miami. While we're on that subject, Miami with Jimmy Butler. And he has held the franchise, the Miami Heat, hostage, which is surprising considering how well that franchise has been run, that Jimmy Butler can totally flip the apple cart, and you've got a franchise that wants to keep him, but then he gets to a point where they can't keep him on the floor, and so they suspend him. They see how he responds to the suspension. Things don't change. In fact, they've gotten worse. Now he's missed a team plane this week and has to get suspended for a couple of more games. The Heat have to just find a way to part ways with Jimmy Butler and get him out of town, because right now he's a cancer around that entire organization. And the Miami Heat cannot win games with this situation going on. That's been proven on the court. They've totally lost the team right now because of the whole Jimmy Butler situation. And it might be best that he does miss a team plane, because I'm almost wondering if somebody on the team told him the plane was leaving later than it actually was, just to make sure he did miss it, because it seems like that's the culture in Miami right now, is you've got a team that has decided to move on from Jimmy Butler, an organization that isn't sure they're ready to move on from Jimmy Butler. Now they've got to figure out if they trade him, what they're going to be able to get, what they want to ask for, where he is wanting to go, and how much they cooperate with him and trying to get him a landing spot that he wants to be at. And it has just become a battle off the court in Miami, and it's killing the Heat right now. And right now, the Heat very close to falling out of playoff position. They are dropping fast. They are now sitting in 9th place. You have to be in the top 10, and I think they've lost 5 of their last 6 games. And so they're only 5 games ahead of Philadelphia, and Philadelphia has been kind of a disappointment this year. If you're a Philadelphia 76ers fan, you got to be disappointed with a 15-27 record. Go out and you spend money and you get Paul George to go along with Embiid and Maxey, and what you've got is a team that's only winning just barely over a third of their games. But and the other thing is they're not good at home. I mean, that's where you at least got to satisfy the home fans when they pay to come see you. And Philadelphia has not done that either, just 6-13 at home. But yeah, it's a real problem right now down in Miami. But the Pacers got to turn it around tomorrow. They'll be back at it. They're taking on the Spurs for their second game in Paris before returning back to the States. And that game will be a noon tip, I believe, coming up tomorrow in Paris. Big show on the way. We've got so many things still ahead of us, and of course, Adam is going to jump in. Adam and I are going to play tag team today. That's what we're actually doing. He'll have some guests. He'll have some interviews. I am traveling, so I am working my way on the road. But the Dons will be in Indianapolis tomorrow against the IU Indy Jaguars. It is the second regular season meeting, the final regular season meeting between these two teams, and it was a tight one back at the Coliseum. Credit to IU Indy. Man, they fought like it was a rivalry game, and the Dons played kind of like they expected to just show up and win. It's going to have to be a little different effort for the Mastodons, because this IU Indy team, they're feisty, but they have struggled to find wins. And it's a new roster that's been assembled by their first-year coach, Paul Casaro, who, of course, had time in Fort Wayne as an assistant for John Kaufman and the Mastodons. But the Dons will play tomorrow, 2 o'clock down in Indianapolis. And, of course, you can listen to the game, 1380 The Fan and 100.9 FM, starting with a pregame coverage at 1:45. All right, got to get in a break, and we will come back. We are cruising through a Friday edition of the Sports Rush, getting you into your sports weekend on 1380 The Fan and 100.9 FM. Welcome back to the Sports Rush, your daily local sports fix, 4 to 6. Brett Rump, Adam Lundy, and you connected on the Parkview Sports Medicine text line at 260-447-8500, 260-447-8500. Of course, if you don't do it already, we'd ask you to go and check out our podcast page, because every day you can catch up with whatever you missed from the Sports Rush simply by going to wherever you listen to your favorite podcast and searching for the Sports Rush with Brett Rump. It's that simple. Just type that in, find our podcast, make sure you follow, subscribe, rate, review, do all the fun stuff, and then you don't miss a day or a segment of the Sports Rush, because you can always catch up. Easy to listen to in the car. Most of our segments are basically commuter length, which means you can throw on a segment and you can listen to it while you drive to work or you drive the kids to school, whatever it might be. But it's totally free to follow us and listen to our podcast. No subscription is necessary, and that is at wherever you listen to your favorite podcast, but you can also access it by going to 1380thefan.com, which is one of the easier ways to find our podcast, and you can choose which way you listen, whether it's Spotify or Apple Podcasts, whatever. You can find it by going to 1380thefan.com and clicking on the podcast tab. Big weekend for Mastodons basketball as both teams will take on the same opponent at the same time on Saturday. It's second time in this rivalry series that the men and women have played IU Indianapolis on the same date, same time, different city. What is going on with that? I mean, maybe you can't flip-flop who's home, who's away because of whatever they're at in their schedule as far as the home and away games. You don't want to give them 4 home games in a row or something like that. I don't know. But, it certainly seems like it wouldn't have been that difficult for the Horizon League to maybe schedule these as either double headers or, try to alter the start times at least. So those who like to follow both programs can watch one or go to one and maybe watch the other, or as we prefer, listen to the other, depending on which direction you go. If you go to the men's game, the only way to access the women's game would be through ESPN Plus. But it just doesn't make sense. I don't know how this schedule ended up being this schedule that twice the rivalry game conflicts with each other. It shouldn't happen this way. But tomorrow, it's easy to remember. It's Purdue-Fort Wayne versus IU Indianapolis at 2 o'clock tomorrow, whether you want a women's game or a men's game. The only thing you need to know is who's playing where. And the men will be on the road. The women will be at the Gate Center. But for the men, a tough one in Oakland on Wednesday. They fall on the road. Hey, I'll tell you what. Road games are darn tough in league play. I mean, they are. It is tough to go on the road and win. It has always been that way. It probably will always be that way. Look at any league you want to look at and look at home team dominance and even teams that are sub 500 and how they perform. And this is an Oakland team that, hey, they're over 500 in the league. They're a good, respectable program. And, of course, Greg Campy's been there 41 years as their head coach. Last year, they made it to the NCAA tournament. So, there's no shame in losing to Oakland. But, as I said off air the other night, Mastodons are a better team than Oakland. And I don't want Oakland to hear me say that because that might fire them up for the rematch. But overall, the Mastodons are a better team than Oakland. The problem is sometimes in basketball you end up with favorable matchups, and it's how much you can exploit those favorable matchups. And for Oakland, they have 2 6'6" post players, and they're primarily posts. Now, yeah, they'll step outside the arc occasionally and once in a blue moon shoot a three-pointer, but they're 2 6'6" guys that are wide bodies. One is 6'6", 250. One is 6'6", 240. And so, they're big, strong guys around the basket. And the Dons, without a center, they are a lot of times playing a roster that includes one four-man who has to play the 5 and then includes guards. And, you got a 6'5", really slender guy that's not a body pounder down in the low block. You've got, Jalen Jackson, 6'2", Rasheed Bellows, 6 feet, and Quentin Morton-Robertson's 5'8". And so basically you've got a set of high school-size guards. Now, Jalen Jackson plays a lot bigger than 6'2" because he is physically very strong and a good finisher around the basket. But he struggled a little bit to finish at the basket. In fact, all the Dons just struggled with layups. And I think what they expected was Oakland was going to be a lot more physical at the rim than they turned out to be. And they almost conceded layups, but the Dons, expecting contact, then missed those layups. And just too many missed layups. And I've said it before that the three-pointer is sexy, and the Dons are one of the best in the country at three-point shots. Man, you like seeing threes and rainbows that are dropping through nothing but twine. You're going to get it at a Mastodons game. They average 11 threes a game, which is top 10 in the country. They shoot it about 38, 39% as a team, which is also right there, top 10 in the country. And they are great three-point shooters. But what wins games? Layups and free throws. And the Dons didn't get to the free throw line against Oakland, and that, I think that's part of Greg Campy's game plan. Don't foul them at the basket. They'll put up some wild shots trying to get contact, and they get to the free throw line quite often. And, Greg Campy's been around 41 years. He looks at the stats. He knows exactly, the way to beat the Mastodons is keep them off the free throw line, and they did it. Now, the officials also let the teams play, but the Dons didn't get a great whistle, and they didn't get to the free throw line. And then they didn't make their layups. And even though they hit a lot of threes, in fact, they were 10 of 15 from the 3-point line. 10 of 15. Great percentage. But couldn't win the game. Ended up falling 76-72. And again, Oakland had the game wrapped up. They inbound a ball with like 1.5 seconds. They throw it over the top on a full court pass. And they get a guy behind the Dons defense as they had the full court pressure on. He makes the catch outside the 3-point line. But he decides to go ahead and finish, even though the Dons didn't really just give up. They pretty much gave up. They threw in the white towel. He still proceeded to go down and dunk it at the buzzer. And lucky he didn't have a little push and shove at the end of the game, because a lot of teams would resent a team scoring a bucket that was meaningless at the buzzer, and he went in and threw it down with one hand to give a little showtime to the home crowd. And I know a lot of coaches, they don't necessarily approve of that. It's not their thing, but that's how the game ended up being a 4-point game. Miriam Marquesano, her women's team, went on the road to Detroit. What a win for this team. You look at the Horizon League women's standings, and there's 3 power programs in the Horizon League. There are 3 teams that are all great basketball teams that are basically battling it out to see which one of them comes on top. The Mastodons right now, perfect in league play because they got a win over the 2 others. They beat Green Bay at home, and they won at Cleveland State. They're going to have rematches against both of them at Green Bay, home to Cleveland State on February 15th, which is going to be the annual Pink Out game. But the Mastodon women, they got down 10 points at the end of the first quarter and just not phased. They came out, dominated the second quarter, had a 1-point lead by halftime, and then put the game away in the second half and ended up winning. But a road win for the women, and now they come home and take on IU Indianapolis tomorrow, Gate Center, 2 o'clock. You want to enjoy some good college basketball on a Saturday? That's your opportunity right there. Get to the Gate Center and check out this team that's won 12 games in a row, that is unbeaten. I believe it is 9-0, 8-0 or 9-0 at home so far this season. They've really put on a show. And Lauren Ross, right now, a chance to be a 50-50-90 player, 50% from the field, 50% from 3, 90% at the free throw line. And that's like a real rarity in women's basketball, that she's hovering right around those numbers for the season, and a heck of a player for Purdue Fort Wayne. All right, we will take a break, and we will come back. I'm going to let Adam talk to our guest next. I'm going to, hand it off here. It's like tag team. Much easier to talk to guests from the studio than here on the road. So we've got a guest comes up next. This is the Sports Rush on 1380 The Fan and 100.9 FM.
This is Joe Tippman, and you're listening to the Sports Rush with Brett Rump on 1380 The Fan and 100.9 FM.
Shout out to Big Joe bringing us back here on the Sports Rush on 1380 The Fan and 100.9 FM. This is Adam Lundy. I'm going to be bringing you up till the 5 o'clock hour, wrapping up this hour here on the Sports Rush. It's time to talk about the Indianapolis Colts and all of their latest moves and goings-on down in Indy at Lucas Oil Stadium. Joining me to talk about the Colts is my man Destin Adams from A to Z Sports. He covers the Indianapolis Colts, does a great job of it. Destin, how you doing this afternoon? You told me you're trying to stay warm.
Yeah, trying. I think everybody's probably in the same boat right about now, but we're getting through it.
We are getting through it. I told you, we Indiana guys, we're used to this sort of weather, and we'll make it through. And I know you're going down south here in a little while, so that'll be good to get a little break from this Indiana weather. But appreciate you jumping on and talking to one of the radio guys here today about the Colts. And if you listen to some of the other radio guys, maybe on national programming, Sam Darnold coming to the Indianapolis Colts. Lock it in. Am I right, Destin?
Yeah, definitely an interesting thing to hear. I put me in the boat that I'll be shocked to see that happen, but it's something to talk about in late January.
Absolutely, yeah. I don't know if I see that move in the near future anytime soon, especially with the development of Anthony Richardson late in last season. But going to some actual moves that the Colts have made, they are sticking with head coach Shane Steichen. They are sticking with GM Chris Ballard. Any surprise there on either of those that they're sticking with those two guys, Destin?
Yeah, I mean, I think going into the last couple of weeks, there was speculation, there was smoke, and where there's smoke, sometimes fire can come around those two. Shane Steichen, I really don't feel like he ever really was on the hot seat, and whether that is warranted or not, I just don't think the Colts were ever going to move off of Shane Steichen after this year. Had a really, really solid first year. You leave that first season with a lot of upside, feeling like you probably got the right head coach. Second year, you underperform a little bit. It's definitely caused a little bit of tension in the fan base and some of the things that have happened, even in terms of handling and public press opportunities on Steichen's part. But I don't think Steichen was ever really in danger. On the Chris Ballard side of things, I think that one had a little bit more legs to where, like, what will the Colts do? I felt like it was pretty telling that Jim Irsay didn't even need to sleep on it. Put that announcement out pretty much the same day, letting everybody know these are the guys that are going to be in charge of the day-to-day of the Indianapolis Colts next year. And I think it definitely probably tied their hips together, probably also with Anthony Richardson, which brings you back to what you brought up about Sam Darnold and why I don't know why that would be realistic, because I really feel like those three right now are tied together. If the Colts succeed with those three, then obviously they'll continue to be here. But if 2025 is another 2024, I think we're probably looking at a full reset in Indianapolis.
Absolutely, a full reset would be required. But you said those three guys are kind of linked together, and the fact that Irsay did bring them back so willingly, and like you said with Ballard, just instantly just put out that note on social media saying, hey, he's back for another year, it has to make you think that there's a pretty high expectation for this trio coming into next season. Is it playoffs or bust in your mind for these three guys?
Yeah, I think the roster they had, they go into this last year with that being the expectation. So I definitely don't think you can lower the bar. And they could say a lot of different things, AFC South or bust, divisional round or bust. I think playoff or bust is probably the accurate way to put it. I think if you go another season without making the playoffs, which would be the fifth year in a row, for what this team used to be known as in the NFL and what this team used to be known as in this division, I think that is definitely going to be the last straw for the Irsays, where that's when the reset would have to come in.
Absolutely. And another move that the Colts did make, it was a parting of ways between the Colts and defensive coordinator Gus Bradley. They bring in Lou Anarumo from the Bengals. What are your thoughts on the hire?
Yeah, I mean, I think parting ways with Gus, you had to have some form of change, and how we just said Steichen and Ballard are back in the mix. So how do you make a change and give fans a little bit of what they're asking for after a disappointing season? They decide to do that by firing Gus Bradley. And I would say this feels different than the last hiring process when they go and hire Gus, because they go from Eberflus to Gus Bradley, where their defensive schemes are pretty similar. I think a lot of fans, when you talk about schemes, you just think like 3-4, 4-3. And if you're staying in that wheelhouse, like, you're going to be a pretty similar style defense. This time around, they stay in the 4-3 setup, but Lou Anarumo and Gus Bradley's philosophy in terms of the defensive side of the ball probably couldn't be more opposite. So the fact that the Colts went such a different direction than what they have done since Chris Ballard has been here as general manager, and then obviously this is Shane Steichen's first defensive hire, with Gus Bradley already being here when he accepted the head coaching job. I think it definitely at least shows you that there's going to be change this offseason. Last year was a very uber passive approach by this team. And with them making this drastic of a change on that side of the ball, I do think it should give fans a little bit of a light bulb moment, that we could see the Colts do some things that they haven't been so accustomed to doing in the last few years.
Yeah, we're a fan of describing the Gus Bradley defense, or what it was, since it's a past tense now, as vanilla. It's a very vanilla defense that just allows for too much passing and just too much open looks for the quarterback to make simple plays. And especially late in games, we did not like seeing them just, opposing teams just make it all the way down the field in crucial moments. You mentioned in your article here, and I encourage anybody to check out your articles. You can follow Destin at the Destin Adams on X/Twitter, and he links to all of his articles on A to Z Sports there. Very good stuff. You mentioned that this hiring of Lou Anarumo could make some drastic changes coming to their personnel and philosophy. Take me to the personnel side. What could we be looking at on that under Lou Anarumo on the defense?
Yeah, I think the area of the field where what the Colts currently have is just not going to do enough in terms of where this roster is and being able to run his defense effectively is in the secondary. Lou Anarumo is somebody who he throws a vast different groupings of coverage systems at quarterbacks. Like, the entire premise of what Lou does is he wants to throw multiple looks at a quarterback to confuse quarterbacks and force mistakes. And we've seen a lot of really good quarterbacks have some really bad games against this defense. Lou Anarumo, that defensive side of the ball, played a really big role in getting the Bengals to their Super Bowl that year. And if you go back and watch that game, you see Patrick Mahomes and what that looks like, and how one of the worst games we've ever seen Mahomes play in the playoffs comes in that AFC Championship game against the Bengals defense. I would expect that you're going to see a free safety addition. I think you have to have somebody reliable on the back end in terms of coverage that you can give that responsibility to. And we're going to be seeing a lot more man coverage called here. And with the corner room, Lou Anarumo values speed more than so of what Gus Bradley valued in terms of length at the corner position. So getting some more speed on the outside is going to be very critical. So corner and free safety are definitely two spots that I'm watching closely, especially with some of the names that are available in free agency.
Yeah, awesome. Absolutely. Another article of yours that caught my eye on A to Z Sports is kind of looking ahead towards the draft, and one of the latest mock drafts that you wrote about has the Colts taking an offensive tackle in the first round with their 14th pick, and that would be a shocking result, as you said. You don't see that happening, do you?
Yeah, no. So I actually, the more I thought about it, I really think offensive tackle would be the most shocking thing the Colts can do in terms of first-round capital this year. The Braden Smith situation is obviously a big question mark, and what his future holds here. They can get a lot of money back by moving off of him this offseason. So if they decide to do that, obviously that would open something up at tackle. I thought Matt Gonzalez played really well in his spot starts this past year on the left and right side.
Yeah.
And he had to play enough to the point where I would be very shocked to see the Colts put a significant pick into tackle. I think you have to add depth at tackle, at guard, potentially at center if Ryan Kelly moves on and you go with one of the young guys there as well. But you don't usually find depth linemen in the first round. If you're drafting an offensive lineman in the first round and he's not starting right away, that's usually a problem. And there are other positions where that's not as much the case. But offensive linemen, if you're drafting them that early, they need to play. And I don't see that being the approach for the Colts. Definitely a lot of other positions that I'm looking at pick 14 or wherever they end up selecting over tackle.
Yeah, Ballard always likely to move down in the draft, so it's to be seen if the Colts pick at number 14. Any particular names stand out to you in this upcoming draft, like specifically?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm like a lot of people where it comes to Penn State tight end Tyler Warren really stands out as an option. I know the entire Colts fan base wanted Brock Bowers or bust last year. After seeing how well he performed as a rookie, it looks like the fans may have been right there. And getting somebody like Tyler Warren, who had a very good season at Penn State, and we watched him lead that offense to being what they were, to get to the playoff, to win a game in the playoff. I think he'd be very interesting. There's a multiple different secondary options as well. Somebody that may be a trade back in the first round option or even in the second round option, who fans in state will know pretty well, is Xavier Watts at Notre Dame. A ball hawking type free safety like that. I think that's exactly what this defense needs to add this offseason, whether it's a veteran or in the draft, for a guy like Lou Anarumo and what he wants to do.
That certainly would be a great tool for the defense of Anarumo. Moving away from the Colts for just a little bit, the coaching carousel in the NFL has been spinning around. Just wanted to get your take on a couple of the head coaching hires. This one announced earlier today. The Las Vegas Raiders have hired former Seahawks coach Pete Carroll. Wanted to get your thoughts on that hire out in Las Vegas.
Yeah, I mean, Las Vegas is a big market, obviously. And now they have Tom Brady in the front and the management staff, whatever you want to call his role nowadays. And then you have a name like Pete Carroll coming in at head coach. I mean, I think it makes sense. I mean, the Las Vegas Raiders, whether they're winning or losing, they're in one of the biggest markets in sports right now. They're in one of the best divisions in football right now. They need to figure out the quarterback. But I think having those type of leaders and those type of big names in that building, I think it makes sense. And I think it's probably the right approach coming up next, getting a veteran like Pete Carroll who can come in and kind of be the adult in the room and kind of figure out what needs to change there. Because they need the quarterback, but they have some other things they need to figure out there in Vegas as well.
Definitely. Now moving on to the AFC South, Jacksonville Jaguars. Liam Cohen kind of pulls a switcheroo on the Buccaneers. He was going to be the offensive coordinator and kind of had an agreement there. But then Jacksonville offers him the head coaching job, and he takes it, kind of dissing the Buccaneers a little bit. What do you think about Liam Cohen down in Jacksonville?
Yeah, I mean, if the AFC South had to be normal for more than 12 hours, I think they would
explode,
roll over and die. I don't know if they have that ability. So obviously the most chaotic head coaching hire this cycle is seen. And usually you don't see a GM fired multiple weeks into an off season. So the Jaguars took a different approach. I do like Liam Cohen, though. I think Liam Cohen has had success everywhere he's been. He was very solid with McVay, with the Rams, goes to Kentucky, helps Kentucky have one of their best offensive seasons in the last decade. At Kentucky, makes the jump to the NFL again with Tampa. I felt like the Bucs offense, who had succeeded the last 2 years, and they've now seen offensive coordinators get head coaching jobs 2 years in a row. I thought the version we saw with Cohen actually was more impressive than what we saw with Dave Canales, who's now in Carolina. I thought we really saw him maximize what Baker Mayfield's skill set is. And I think a guy like Trevor Lawrence, who already has killed the Colts in the past, even if he's not had the career everyone has appointed for him, is a very, very talented quarterback. And I think giving Liam Cohen something like that with some of their young weapons over there, it should be a good fit as long as they can find a way to simmer down on the drama aspect that's going on in Jacksonville and just play football. And that's been a struggle for Jacksonville, and that's been a struggle for the division. So we'll see if Jacksonville can just play football and make this Liam Cohen hire a really good on-field product.
Yeah, I think the AFC South could definitely have its own reality show on some network. Real quick before I let you go, thoughts on the Bears getting Ben Johnson from the Lions?
Yeah, I mean, anytime you see a coordinator stay in the division like that in terms of going to a rival, it's always going to be pretty notable. Ben Johnson obviously has been a hot candidate for multiple years, pushes it off the last two, which makes it almost crazier that you stay in the division.
Yeah.
You've been so selective and you go there. I've seen a lot of Lions fans that have taken a little bit personally how he accepted a job in the division and saying that he checked out in the playoffs. I feel like those things get overblown so much. I mean, I can't imagine that this guy and this team were not trying to do anything but win football games. And I don't think there was a looking ahead situation. It'll be very interesting to see what it's like in Chicago because, I mean, it's a twofold. It'll be interesting to see what Jared Goff is like without Ben Johnson, but it'll be really interesting to see what Ben Johnson is without all of the weapons he had in Detroit, the offensive line he had in Detroit. He's going to go from a top 5 offensive line to a bottom 5 offensive line. And he has some fun skill players there in Chicago, but if the offensive line can't protect Caleb, Ben's going to have a lot of limitations to what he can do.
Awesome. At the Destin Adams on X/Twitter, A to Z Sports, does a great job covering the Colts. Check him out. Check out his writing. Destin, really appreciate you joining me today on the Sports Rush. Have a fantastic weekend, my man.
Appreciate you for having me, man.
Absolutely. That is Destin Adams, A to Z Sports, joining us here on the Sports Rush. We're going to go ahead and take our break, come back for our second hour, take you up till 6 o'clock with your local sports fix, 4 to 6. This is the Sports Rush on 1380 The Fan, 100.9 FM.